SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
The gambling world awoke on the first day of the working week to the surprise news that Française de Jeux had tabled a €2.6 billion bid to acquire Kindred Group Plc. In its announcement of the bold move to Euronext Paris, FDJ signalled its intent to become Europe's second biggest gambling operator as it continued its M&A campaign beyond French shores. What is the ripple effect of this transformative bid to acquire Kindred Group likely to be on European markets and their competitive makeup as a hungry and deep-pocketed French giant awakens? And has the gambling M&A cycle now returned to Europe following its recent focus on the US? I'm Martyn Elliot, and on today's iGaming Daily, I'm joined by SBC's Content Director Ted Menmuir and payment expert editor Ted Orme-Claye to discuss the fallout from FDJ's audacious move. Before we go any further, it would be remiss of me not to mention that this podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 56% of the EGR Power 50 personalised player experiences with Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. Now, if you visit Optimove's booth at ICE and mention that you listen to iGaming Daily, they will give you an Amazon gift card. So can't go wrong with that offer. So, Ted, I'm just wondering, what would you spend your Amazon gift card on? Would it be some sort of Gladiators memorabilia by any chance?
How news spreads, Martin, of my addiction to Gladiators and 90s nostalgia. And I'd just like to tell our audiences that there is more to me than watching Gladiators. This countdown is there's Neighbours, Home and Away. So please come and talk to me at ICE.
On a serious note, I'm interested. Have you been watching the rebooted Neighbours on Amazon Freevee? Is it?
I watch all reboots. I'm addicted to reboots.
It's good. That's very pleasing to know that that somebody is catered for by the rather limited imaginations of the current generation of TV commissioning editors. And what about you, Ted? What will you be spending your money on? An Ivan Toney voodoo doll after his antics against Forest at the weekend?
No, I feel like that would be a bit too bitter of me. I don't know. Actually, maybe I'll be a different kind of bitter. Or petty. I'll buy a novelty countdown teapot to put in the Manchester office to make Ted jealous.
Well, I'll look forward to that and to you making the tea as well. So perhaps we should really turn our attention to the subject in hand rather than continuing with this fairly mindless chit chat. Perhaps Ted, you could just begin by giving us your reaction to the news on Monday.
Okay. Yes. This Ted will go. Okay.
Sorry, I forgot we need a differentiator. It's been a while since I've been on with both of you. So, Edward, if you could begin with your reaction to Monday's news.
Okay. So on Monday, the gambling industry kind of was abruptly awakened to the news that FDJ has tabled a 2.6 billion all-cash bid for Kindred Group. As has been communicated, Kindred Group is going through its kind of corporate transformation following kind of 2 lackluster years, and it had been kind of eyeing a potential sale by its investors. And on the bid that FDJ has tabled, its biggest offer, and it follows, I think we're now year 3 following its Paris Euronext IPO, in which FDJ kind of finally divested itself from the French state and became an independent operator. And we're now looking at a very kind of changed makeup for European gambling, in which you've got a deep-pocketed French PLC looking for active opportunities in the market to go and acquire. And kind of the analysis from observers is that there's a new player in town, there's a new PLC, and it is, from its statement in the acquisition, it's looking to become the second biggest gambling group once it acquires Kindred, and that will have a ripple effect on pretty much all Western markets. And it also kind of shakes up the competitive landscape of European gambling PLCs, who's competing, and the actual depths of the market.
Okay, and what about you, Ted? Because obviously, for more recent listeners, you're sort of a recent transfer to payment expert. The sports betting world was very much your beat for the last 2 years.
Yeah, it was funny. It was both a surprise and not a surprise in a way. I mean, it wasn't a surprise in that I think it's looked like an acquisition of Kindred has been on the table for a while. I think it hadn't the board a few months back had said that they were considering sort of all options for the company's future, including a merger and acquisition, and there was quite a heavy emphasis placed on that from what I remember. And on the other end, FDJ have also been embarking on quite an extensive expansion strategy through acquisitions themselves. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but they've been getting involved in buying both sports betting and lottery holdings to become, as Ted said, to secure their objective of being one of the biggest, if not the second biggest, as their statement put out, gambling operator in the European scene with quite a multi-dynamic, multinational offering. It was just so just from my perspective, even though both of these things were going on and were on the table, I just didn't expect them to come to a head in that way, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, of course. And going back to first, Ted, should we have seen this coming, that we got a deal this big in the European space this early in the year?
I don't think that we should have seen it coming this early in the year, but I think that especially City analysts should have been monitoring FDJ movements closely. Now, if we go back to FDJ when they floated on the Paris Euronext exchange, that was one of the top 10 biggest IPOs of that year. It really didn't get that much profile. But the other thing here is that FDJ to date, I mean, post-IPO, in some ways have been quite conservative and have been observing the developments, especially in Western markets, of what's going on, the consolidation and the kind of saturation of peak gambling across key markets or key Western markets in Europe. In terms of kind of their appetite was shown last year when they acquired the Premier Lotteries Ireland. So that was kind of its first platform to expand out of France. Prior to that, its acquisitions were mainly based on strengthening kind of its French retail point. So acquiring payment networks, acquiring retail solutions, and expanding its B2B footprint for the gaming sector. This acquisition is much more B2C focused. And one of the things that they kind of underlined is that they want to be a key player in 100% regulated markets. So again, it's going to pitch them in a battleground with their respective European gambling PLC counterparts.
I should put it shy about pointing out that you did actually predict this, and we had a look back on in our Slack working group today and yesterday, and you did actually predict this some months ago, this very deal. So quite impressive foresight there, Ted. So coming back to you, Ted, here in Manchester, we've mentioned a couple of times that I think there'll be some kind of ripple effect here from this action. What do you think the sort of wider reaction within the European gambling industry is going to be, and how is this deal going to change the competitive makeup?
I think the immediate reaction will be, certainly from the bigger PLCs, ones involved in lots of different markets, will be that a company that was probably already a competitor to an extent to some of them is now obviously an even bigger competitor. By acquiring Kindred, FDJ have acquired Unibet and 32 Red, which are two very solid, proven brands, one in sports betting and one in iGaming, respectively. That have also got quite an extensive visibility in some countries via sports sponsorships, like Rangers in Scotland do some horse racing stuff in the UK as well, just as one example there. And also, so Unibet is active in, the UK, Scandinavian markets, I want to say Romania as well. I think, I'm sure there's some other ones in there, Ted.
Netherlands, Belgium.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. Netherlands and Belgium as well. So this has suddenly expanded FDJ's international scope quite a bit, and therefore we're putting them also in competition with a lot of more established operators within these markets. Obviously, they'd also acquired Z-Turf last year as well, so it's sort of building on that, and they're just starting to put together quite a comprehensive portfolio of international sports betting brands, coupled with, as Ted said, the acquisition of the Irish National Lottery licence, effectively for the remainder of the 10-year duration of that. So I think almost there was part of me that thinks it almost kind of looks like their model is almost mirroring Flutter's to some extent, in that Flutter also have some lottery holdings. And they're just putting together, as I said, a very comprehensive portfolio, a very multi-dynamic portfolio of betting, iGaming, and lottery assets here. And a lot of the other bigger companies out there, as well as some of the smaller ones, of course, are going to be looking at this, thinking, we've got another quite a heavy-hitting competitor to deal with now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they've just gone out and essentially bought a really well-established B2C brand to enter 6 or 7 new markets for them. I don't know, going back to you in London, Ted, what you think? How do you think the big competitors will be feeling about this, and will it change their approach to M&A, do you think?
Okay, so I think, look, this acquisition comes at a point of inflection for European gambling as a whole. Now, as Ted points, you do have to look at the other giants, Flutter being one of them. They're now going to go and kind of have a dual listing on the NYC. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to concentrate less on Europe and focus more on the US, but I think the makeup of gambling at the PLC level across Europe is changing. Now, one of the things that was outlined, and I think we should revise kind of Kindred's last 2 years. I think about 6 months ago, Anders Storm, who was the founder of Kindred, he wrote in the Swedish Expressen this piece regarding the Kindred, and I wouldn't say it's headwinds, but one of the things he stated was that Kindred had kind of reached peak points across key markets, and it was burning a lot of cash out in the US. But his concern was that Kindred was a big operator, but couldn't even compete at that level against your Flutters, against your Entains, and it couldn't kind of keep up with that burning of cash just to enter new markets. And I think that is a realization across a lot of gambling PLCs, the actual cost to play, and what we've seen over the last 5 years primarily, where these gambling PLCs, when they go to market, they have to secure podium places straight away, or else it is a failure of strategy. And I think kind of the leadership and the governance of PLCs are very aware of what's at stake. Looking back at what FDJ have done, it's one of the things that I'm going to be looking at this deal is that, yes, they've acquired Kindred, but they've acquired an operator. What we've seen in the last 2 years is, on Kindred results, is that across markets, across their key markets, is that they've reached saturation in those markets such as Sweden, Holland, and how much kind of growth can they eke out? It's going to be that's going to be a point of interest for me. How do they go to market? what is a fresh market for Kindred now? How they revitalize Kindred brands across, Sweden, Germany, Sweden, Belgium, and the Netherlands.
Okay, thanks for that, Ted. I think that's a good time to just take a message from our sponsors, and when we come back, we'll just have a chat about the landscape for Tier 1 operators in Europe.
Brazil, a global economic powerhouse, deeply passionate about sports, and now home to one of the hottest markets in gaming. And we're giving it the full SBC treatment. Join industry leaders, market experts, and all the major players in the country for 3 days of content, exhibition, and epic networking at the first ever SBC Summit Rio.
And welcome back to part 2 of today's iGaming Daily, where we've been discussing FDJ's move to acquire Kindred Group. So I'm just wondering, Ted, here in Manchester, this has given us a whole new competitor. This is a Tier 1 operator that's come in overnight in there. So how do you think this is going to sort of redefine the landscape for the Tier 1 operators, and how do we now define who are the Tier 1 operators in Europe?
That's a interesting question. That's quite a tricky one. As you say, after marking my return to the sports betting beat in a very heavy hitting style, Martin, I've got to say, kudos. Right. Well, as we've already said, I think I do just want to sort of build on what something Ted mentioned. As this will be an interesting one because Kindred had obviously noted, as Ted mentioned, that they've been struggling to compete with a lot of the companies, a lot of the groups out there that just have a huge budget behind them, namely your Entains and your Flutters. I think are probably the two most obvious examples. So it'll be interesting to see whether this is something that is getting acquired by FDJ going to be a step up for Kindred, or is it FDJ taking on a new challenge with regards to then having to sort of do this competition themselves? But yeah, following on from that and talking more about the landscape. As I said earlier, this is just something that the other gambling PLCs have now got another quite a well-backed competitor to deal with, one with quite a broad, but what is a broad and expanding portfolio of brands. I mean, obviously, I'd still probably count a Tier 1 operator as just being one that has multiple brands that have market leadership or sort of podium spots in more than a few different markets. That usually publicly listed, put together, £1 billion financial results, things like that. Sort of the basic sort of characteristics. I'd say by acquiring Kindred and adding Unibet and 32 Red into its portfolio, I'd say FDJ is probably putting itself up there as a Tier 1, definitely. Although I think Entain and Flutter I would still count as being the two. I'm not really too sure what words to use to describe them, really. The two biggest players, the two clear biggest players in European betting and gaming. But as I said, they've certainly got a new contender to deal with now.
Sure. And Ted, do you want to just come back on that? How do you foresee the changes in the landscape right at the top of the industry?
Yeah, Martin, your question's definitely on point. And it's an industry observation that's going on at the moment, because it's not just the commercial capacity of the PLC. It's, what options do they have, what resources, and the market, their overall presence across multiple markets, but also the makeup. Now, one of the things that we are seeing, and this isn't just FDJ, it's the lottery component, is creeping in. And this is replicated by Flutter. Another company that I think is way under the radar at the moment is Allwyn, with very deep pockets, right? Ambitions to go for an IPO listing, and they are bulking up. Another company that I'd say, keep a close eye out on this year, and talking about a ripple effect, especially in the French market and Western markets, will be FL Entertainment. who are huge media house company, where betting and gaming is still kind of very much a growth project for them, right? But they have deep pockets and could be in there to acquire someone. It's funny because what we see from this acquisition is the narratives of gaming. It just the storylines kind of filter out. Now, FDJ are being aggressive at a time where, one or two gambling PLCs are looking quite shaky, primarily Entain and Triple Eight Holdings, right? And these are companies that are now going to go into transformations and revisions of their portfolios. And one thing we know is that Entain has to revise 36 brands. So I think if you are kind of an analyst now, you've got to observe what are kind of the offcuts there and who's going to pick them up and in what markets they're in. So this acquisition is really very much about what is at stake for Europe, right? And the kind of readdresses the market by market, the kind of competitive landscape of our industry.
Okay, it's interesting. And do you think now the focus is all coming back to Europe from the US? Do you think some of these bigger players have decided the US is, if they're not well established there already, then maybe they should just stick closer to home and invest in Europe instead?
It is something interesting to note, Martyn, about how Kindred obviously last year exited the US markets, didn't they? Which I think is probably almost like a transatlantic continuation of what we were talking about earlier, of how they were recognising that they were struggling to compete with in a lot of major markets with some of the big budget firms. In America, obviously, that's led by the likes of FanDuel and DraftKings, which have FanDuel obviously being part of Flutter, that have a huge amount of resources behind them that Kindred were simply just struggling to keep up with, as quite a few other smaller operators do out there. So, it doesn't actually, I think it's a very good point you've made. It doesn't surprise me at all that a lot of the sort of smaller to medium-sized bookmaking firms that are based in Europe, who've gone to America, tried their hand there, are now repositioning themselves in their home markets.
Just to add, I think it's too easy a narrative to just say, look, FDJ have done this, and this, it's a £2 billion deal. That means it's coming back to Europe. I think the M&A scene in gaming has evolved, and that's partly to do with the US opening up. But I think that the M&A pressures are different now, and empire building is hard in iGaming, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to get burnt, and I think that's what's happened to a lot of companies in North America. However, returning back to Europe, this idea that you can just acquire a company to gain top spots, right? I mean, that is a risky play, and I think that if that kind of continues, you're going to see a lot of companies increase the kind of liability in markets where it's much harder to grow. Saturated markets at the peak, much harder to gain new players, right? So I think there are kind of risks on both sides, right? But the kind of fallout is that if you are a CEO and you get your strategy wrong, you're out the door.
So what's the impact on the B2B market, or is it just a coincidence? No real relevance to it.
Okay, from a B2B perspective, it's this does have implications. I think you got to look at Kambi. So Kambi now kind of free to what's been predicted of them for a long time to look for a sale. It's free of their biggest contract, which is Kindred, and that will go to FDJ. FDJ also have got their own kind of significant B2B side. Will that be revised? So is Sporting Solutions going to come up for sale? However, look, I mean, one of the things that I'd say for FDJ is that, where is this strategy going to fall to? Because it's clear here that they are going to be a B2C powerhouse, and maybe they're better just sticking to that strategy rather than having both a B2C and B2B operation. So I think that will be kind of picked up by investors, and their leadership team will be questioned on that.
Okay. Anything to add as a final word, Ted?
No, I think we've covered fairly all bases. Okay. I guess, just on the B2B thing, I think as well, it's just to build on what we talked about. Yeah, it's quite noticeable that as well as building up this portfolio of some really strong B2C assets with Unibet, 32 Red, its own lottery, as well as its own lottery and betting operations and the lottery operations in Ireland. FDJ, obviously, as well, is putting together quite a decent arsenal of B2B and in-house software, like you mentioned, with its own existing sportsbook technology, in whatever planned integrations it might have of Kindred's own solutions. And then we also talked about its payments acquisitions last year. I think it's quite evident they're going for quite a broad portfolio of B2C and B2B assets.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for that, Ted, and thank you to Ted down in London as well. Obviously, there will be more to come on this story in the coming weeks and months, all of which you can follow on SBC News. And if I can just point you in the direction of a piece which has run on SBC News this morning, titled "FDJ Puts Europe on Notice with Kindred Move," which is an interesting breakdown of the developments and the possible implications from that deal, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. But other than that, thanks for listening, and we'll be back with another edition of iGaming Daily tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.